Pigeons 420. Mr. Grow It. And Rob from Cannabis Lifestyle TV. From the Stash Podcast.
From the Stash Podcast, it's your boy Rob from Cannabis Lifestyle TV, Mr. Grow It, and Pigeons in this motherfucker.
Good to see you.
What's up? Back at it again.
It's always a pleasure, man.
I was going to say, it's always nice to chat with you fellas, man.
Yeah, an afternoon, chilling, talking about something I love.
Unwinding. Man. Finally, the herb is set in, so I'm relaxed, feeling a little, chill, a little chill.
Spirit fingers.
Loosen up. Yeah, man. So, the topic of today's video is something that I am leading up to, and I'm getting ready to be there. And I just had one that I dealt with, but harvesting. How do we do it? When do we do it? What do we do? There's a lot of questions, a lot of different variables to it and how people go about it based on their environment, their process, and their preferences, of course. Now, myself, I've had a lot of different ways. We got videos that cover it on Cannabis Lifestyle. Mr. Grow It's got, and I know Pigeons does as well. And you watch those videos, and there's some things that overlap, but there's a lot of contrasting things where it's like, well, why does one do this and the other do that? And what is it, benefits or pros and cons? Well, I think that's why this episode is going to be a good discussion. So I think starting when we pull, a lot of stuff will overlap in this area. So when do you pull, Mr. Grow? When do you start to pull? What's your ideal time other than looking at the back of the seed box that tells you?
I'll keep the breeder's recommendation in mind. And then I'll use that and kind of count backwards. And really, I'll start checking the trichomes about a few weeks before that harvest window that the breeder recommends. And I'll just start looking at the trichomes, and every, day or two, I'll take a look at the trichomes. And I personally like when most of the trichomes are cloudy and there's a little bit of amber. Now, everybody has their own preference when they pull. Some people wait till it's like 20-30% amber. And then they pull. I'm a mostly cloudy guy with a little bit of amber. And I'll check not just the trichomes on like the top buds. I'll also go down like lower parts of the plant as well and kind of check on multiple buds. And I avoid checking the leaves because the trichomes on the leaf tend to turn a little bit faster than they do on the actual buds. And of course, during the trimming process, we're trimming off those leaves. So those don't matter as much as the buds. So that's kind of what I look at. And then when my trichomes reach to the desired state and it looks like, growth is slowed down and it's ready to go, that's when I'll chop. And I like to cut just at the bottom of the base of the stalk and just hang that plant full. And the reason why I do that is in order to keep the moisture in there. When you're cutting individual branches, some of the branches that you're cutting off, well, then you're cutting off that moisture as well. And it could lead to a little bit faster of drying. And I live in a very dry climate. Natural humidity here is about 30%. I live in a desert region. So cutting it whole and leaving all those leaves on there has just helped a little bit with as far as a slow dry. So that's kind of the initial chop, how I determine when to chop, and then how I chop the plant.
What about you, Pigeons?
Very similar. I typically consider my harvest beginning at the flush. I keep a good close eye on my trichomes as well, looking for about the same. I don't mind, if you've got a 90-10%, if in terms of milky trichomes and a dash, like called sprinkle of amber trichomes. You often see a little bit of clear in there as well. There's always going to be immature. There's always going to be degraded trichomes, but you are looking for a predominantly milky trichome abundance. When I start to see that, I know it's flush time. I need to start flushing. Typically, flushes will last about 2 weeks, like 10 days, give or take, ensuring that I add as much, it's not as much water. I've seen a lot of people oversaturate during a flush. You don't need to add, 100 gallons of water to a 5-gallon pot. It's a bit excessive. I've seen people just run their tubs. They turn their tub on or a hose tub, and they just run it. You don't need to do that, because at a certain point you've gotten rid of the excrement in the pot, and now you're just running water through the pot. It's not going to make it go faster. There's still stored nutrients that you need to wait till it depletes and uses, and then excretes, and then you rinse or flush those out again. But to digress, it's as soon as I see that milky abundance, I know it's flush time. Once I flush, I do prefer to have not a dry pot, but a pot that's perhaps ready to be watered, but not dry. And I don't cut as whole plants because I wash. I do perform a wash on my buds every harvest. Why do I wash my buds? I know this is going to be in the comments, so I'll just answer it. Because they're dirty, and so I wash them. I'm going to nutshell that one because I have plenty of content that covers this subject at length. But in order to get it into the bucket, I cut each branch, which yes, does increase how fast it's going to dry. It's going to increase the time it dries. So what I do is try to manipulate the environment to increase that moisture. So I'm going to have a higher moisture area, somewhere in around that 60, 70 close percent in my environment, to ensure that I can draw out as long as I can. Because I snip each branch, I don't get like 2 weeks dry time. I'm looking more around a 8 to 12, like a 12-day dry time, give or take. And that's it, right to chop right there. That's my preparation.
So what's your solution for the washing then? I know, but for the people listening or watching, what's the process, and what do you put in the wash, so to speak? Not Dawn dish soap, right? Honestly, dude, I just read a good article about it on the Grow Science. I'm working on a Grow Science versus Bro Science, and there's some science to washing your buds. I've been looking into it, and there was a test done. There was some sort of institute, and they were seeing recently, and they washed hemp, and then they're doing another test. They're waiting for results on the flower for cannabis and seeing any degrade to the, outside part of it. But the reason they did it was outdoor, of course, is a big reason. But they're seeing for indoor that it could be beneficial too if you don't have the most sealed, tight room with great clean air and filtration, and you have animals or things like that, or you're frequently going in that room. I mean, literally, even dead skin follicles can go in the air. It's if you want totally clean stuff, or if you're going to cook with it even, you may want to consider washing your buds. Myself, I don't do it, but I think for some people who may be interested, I think knowing how to do it would be good if they don't want to find you on YouTube, if they allow you here.
And actually, as I said that, if you were to go search that content, I'm not entirely sure that content is now available on YouTube. You might have to go searching over at CLtv.
Yeah, watch CLtv.com.
Watch CLtv.com to find some of that. However, it's a 3-step process. There's 3 buckets, 5 gallons of room temperature water in each one. The first pail has my method, only because you guys know that I'm a dinosaur and I'm not one to change very quick. I'm slow. Is the 1 cup of lemon juice and 1 cup of baking soda mixture goes into the first pail, and followed by the 2 second pails that have nothing in them, just the room temperature water. Now there's also another mix which I haven't looked in more detail to, but initially sounds like it's a more invasive wash to try to get rid of like mold, is if you're using like a peroxide mix wash. Now there might be other reasons, and it might even be more effective than the one I'm using, but I digress. So it's just a simple wash. The most common questions are: does it degrade? Does it degrade? Do you lose trichomes? Yeah, of course. Yeah, you do lose trichomes, but these trichomes are weak and degraded trichomes. These aren't strong, mature, the ones that are getting you high trichomes, because they're going to stick onto the plant. These handle waterings in terms of rain, wind, elements in the environment outside that they're not going to be susceptible to. But the weak ones, they do find their way to the bottom. But when you look under a microscope to look at the trichomes that collects in the bottom of the bucket, you're going to see some. But what's going to blow you away is the amount of grime, grit, dirt, hair, and shit you're going to find in that same little microscopic look in the bottom of the bucket. My garden is not perfectly sealed. I am an odd example out, because I pull my plants out all the time out of my garden to record. I pull in to record videos. I pull lights tripods, camera equipment in and out of my garden. I trek in and out of my garden. So I'm not a perfect example of someone who keeps the most cleanly or clean garden. But so this is a reason why I wash. And then, of course, the amount of weed that I see online that people take pictures of that have hair in them is incredible. Like, we're talking some big, like, not high profile, but we're talking very popular pictures that have hair in them. And it's like, it's gross. It's gross. It's gross. So that's my process. To each their own. I've kind of gone over the hill in terms of, there's a crowd that wants to hear this message of washing their buds. And then there's a crowd that are very, very passionate, that have no science or argument, no substance to their argument to prove me otherwise, but are very passionate in regards to that this shouldn't happen.
Well, I'll prove you otherwise right now. Hair is high in phosphorus. So if you're smoking the hair, you get more nutrients of phosphorus within.
There you
That's
go.
a good point. That's a good point.
Just kidding.
And I'm sure skin
follicles.
I'm sure that gets you high too,
You
man.
know what I'm saying?
As
My
somebody
skin
who
follicles, you probably
may
get
or may
lit.
not surfed the carpet once or twice in their day, I can say that I've probably smoked rice. I've thought it was fluff. I've for a few things. So
I remember one time a buddy dropped a joint in a Pepsi can and we let it dry out and smoked it the next day. some teenage shit.
Lord mercy.
I'm not proud. You didn't just hear that, anyone listening or watching.
God, I got worse. But I'm not gonna, I made a fucking a pipe out of a rubber eraser one time. And
that's what I'm saying. Like, this is, so I'm not too worried about a little bit of hair, but I do see the reason why doing it. And I appreciate you breaking it down. And I like to pull that out of you every time we talk, so that way you can get more detail. Because really, the more you explain it, the better I understand it. So I'm like, okay, all right, no, I get it.
And the common test I tell people to do is, and a lot of people say that my garden is clean. I clean my garden 2 times a week, to which I say, you're cleaning it too much and you're introducing more things than you are.
Get out of there.
You're preventing. Get out of there. Quit cleaning your room 2 times a week. But go up to your lights with your bare finger when they're not incredibly hot, and just run your finger across the top of your light from one end to the other, and then look at your finger. You're going to be amazed what you see on your light.
And then lick your finger.
And then lick your finger.
Disclaimer: don't lick your finger. But it's funny.
A lot of people are going to burn themselves.
I
right
know.
now.
I
Like,
know. It was on.
He
I
said,
didn't
no,
hear
it's
that part.
blistering. Pigeons, was that what you expected?
God.
But
If you're watching this during the premiere, I'll let you know. Don't do that.
Don't do that. But what I do want you to do is, with your remaining thumb, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button and hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe and turn the bell on with all the notifications, so you know exactly when From the Stash Podcast drops here on YouTube, because we appreciate you guys for doing that. That helps us, your commenting, your participation. That's huge for our channel. And the thumbs up, it really helps the algorithm just pick the stash out of
a little push out of the stash.
Out of the group. Out of the stash. Find the stash.
Pulls the stash out of the stash. It's funny, like me and Chris have like the exact same process. I like to slow dry mine. Also, I used to do it in pieces. I have a dry rack that stacked up like that, and I'd cut it into pieces, and it would dry pretty quickly. I'd notice a lot of times that I'd have buds that are kind of compressed or flattened because they were sitting there, and I'm like, I don't like
doing that.
Or they'd stack a little too much, and I'm not a fan. And I'd like to just hang a few plants if you got the space to do it. Obviously, hang a few plants. You can get a grow tent. It'd probably be the best option, in my opinion, to use a grow tent for it. Some people would swear that that's not. They'd rather have open. Like, some people have a lung room in their house. Depends on what you got, your situation is. But whole plant for me every time. And then when it goes to trimming, I'm a dry trim guy. I don't know. I'm a dry guy. That's my thing. So you guys may do it differently. I do it mainly because, again, that slow process. I like the slow drying. And I noticed for me, when I've cut it a little earlier, seemingly that chlorophyll's there a little longer. It's got that green smell just a little bit longer. In comparison, I feel like I'm cured up once I pull off those dry leaves. But it's hard. Honestly, the Trim Daddy with a dry run compared to a wet run is a little more of a challenge. So you'll see that if you try to go dry.
Right.
Yeah, I also like to do a dry trim. Now, drying conditions, it might vary a little bit from you guys. I used to do 50% RH and then room temperature. So about 70 degrees Fahrenheit is what I used to do when I first started. That's what I read.
For your dry?
For my dry.
Okay,
Now,
okay.
over the years, I've increased that to get a little bit slower of a dry, especially since I live in a very dry climate. I live in a desert region, and natural humidity is about 30-ish%. So 55% up to 60% now I'm doing is about 60% RH is what I like in my drying conditions. And that gets me till about 7-8 days it takes to fully dry down to where I want it. And then room temperature is still fine, 70 degrees Fahrenheit. If I can get lower than that, a lot of people do 60-60. They do 60% RH, 60 degrees. And that seems to work well. The lower temperature seems to work a bit better. So that's what I do for the dry. And then when I do a dry trim, I prefer the dry trim over the wet trim. It's just, in my opinion, it's a little bit easier to trim as long as, when it's dry versus when it's wet, as far as gunking up. I know that depends on the trichomes and the cultivar
too,
you have and how frosty those buds are. But for the most part, in my opinion, I know people will disagree with me. There's people who love wet trimming and are dedicated to wet trimming versus dry trimming.
And that's why we want to hear from you.
But the dry trim, it just seems like it can be a little bit faster, in my opinion. And so I do like doing dry trim.
Again, different from you guys. I do both, and well, since having the Trim Daddy, shout out to them, non-sponsored comment. It's wet, like it's so much faster doing a wet trim, but there's always two stages. I like to pluck off my main leaves, the main fan. I use each part of the plant for different things. Aside from, I wish I had a use for the stems. I don't do stem tea. I burn them, so I release that energy back into the world.
My dog used to tear them up.
There you go.
Love them.
I
as long as you're not spraying any pesticides or anything on your plants and they're clean there, animals love them.
Oh, I didn't even know. Yeah, I didn't even know. However, when it comes to the trim, the first part of the trim is plucking off the fan leaves. I use my fan leaves generally for ingestion. Like I eat the majority of my plant. The fan leaves get tossed into my breakfast shakes in the morning. I cut the stem. I cut the big stem off, and I wash my leaves because they don't get put into the wash, my bud washing. So I take them off and I wash them, and then I throw them in whole with like some strawberries, yogurt, little pineapple is what I had this morning, and some frozen veggies. Just give it a little bit of coldness, so it's not warm drink. It's no fun.
Sounds fire.
And it's really good. It's really good. The leaves have proven nutrition already in them. You may as well take benefit to that. So great for cooking. The other trim, the sugar leaves and the close trim, that's all going to be primarily washed because I'm going to use those for concentrate. Those go into my concentrate bin, and boom, that's pretty much what feeds my dabs around here. And then the fine trim is, those fine sugar leaves. I didn't know this, and I'm sure maybe Rob, you can attest to this. I didn't know that a sugar leaf joint is a little gift from God.
Yeah.
Sent to the
certain
people.
cultivars, dude, they're fucking fire.
I'm not a joint guy, but if somebody ever came up to me and said I rolled a sugar leaf joint, are you interested? I would hop all over that. It's one of the most flavorful. Like I thought it was just hype. I didn't understand, and then I did it, and it is one of the most flavorful, most enjoyable ways to enjoy a joint. And it was just so good. So needless to say, sugar leaves are primarily, you can get some good ones. Save those for some joints. The ones I'm going to take out for my boys in the baseball game and have some fun. And then I'm not a fan of dry trimming. I think personally it's more work because you have to be finicky. Like I don't know.
And that's where the preference
I have
comes
to
into
wash.
play, man.
That's just it. It's preference. I feel like it's How dry are you dry trimming and then it goes into the jar? or
for
is
the
there a
most
little
part.
bit of a dry
Yeah.
after that?
Oh yeah. I dry trim when it's ready to go into the jars.
Okay.
So and
Okay.
it'll be the leaves will be crispy enough to where really some of them
You
just
just
fall off
glide.
just by gliding
Yeah.
the
Yeah, you can even
the
take
trimmer.
gloves. It just like I'll take my gloves sometimes, just like pull across the bud, depending on the
Yeah.
cultivar, and it'll just pull it right off. And I'm like, yeah. And I'm just smoking mine. I'm not going to the dispensary or anything like that. So I'm usually
No, I'm the
content. Like it
same
doesn't
way.
have to be crazy tight trim.
I
I'm
don't.
good with it.
I get that's one of the biggest criticisms I get from the comment section of my videos is when I do bud porn, and people are like, "Oh, look at that! It's like a hairy woman." I'm like, maybe you like them hairy, man. I don't know. I like
all
personally, I love it.
natural.
I love it. I don't give a shit. I don't give a fuck. You know, it's like
You had some
you
hairy
said it.
tits,
I'm
I
not
still
selling
like
it,
you,
man.
girl.
Right. Yeah. She don't like you, bro. You jello. But yeah, so it's I do a final manicure before it goes into the jar, because a wet trim, as great as it is, it's not tight. You can't, there's still, those leaves are just like full of life still, and some of them kind of like settle out and you get a little bit of a twist that you can get some unevenness. So yeah, sometimes there's a final manicure is what I like to call it. Give them a little how do you do, throw them into the jar, and away you go.
So once in the jar, how long do you cure it? Like it depends obviously on the cultivar and the person. How long are you curing on average? Because your process is a little different, you know what I'm saying, in comparison to ours.
That's a question I get a lot, is how long do I need to cure before I can sample it? I will not sample anything. The rule of thumb is no less than 2 weeks. I will not smoke something for less than 30 days. It needs to be in the jar for 30 days before I even think about it. Because it's still too moist. I don't like it. I don't like it when it's within that. Like, it's not that I don't like it. I just feel like the potential is not even there yet. You haven't even pulled out the greatness. You know
it's
what
like
I mean?
a rookie in their career. It's like, you're good, but we see the potential.
People always ask too, like, what are the great ways to grow weed? You need weed to grow weed. You know what I mean? You need to have a supply so that you can get through that dry, the cure, that night, so you can get there. You need to get there. You know, it's like one of the biggest misconceptions is that you're going to get into this and get something immediately. You're waiting a good half year. You're not getting anything for 6-8 months. You know what I mean?
If you're just getting started, man. Whew, I mean, that's even this. Everything we just talked about is like from beginning to end. It's like roughly 2 months flower, depending on the cultivar. Then there's your drying time, another week. Then there's your curing time. So it's like a 3-month process just there alone. It's a quarter of the year.
Veg. That's not even veg. You
A
had to do
quarter
8
of the
weeks of
year
veg before that.
So I mean, for me, I don't really cure quite as long. Just the cultivars I have right now. I do have one strain right now, this King Mamba OG, that I am doing that with because it's not slapping right away. But like the headbanger is immediately just like, boom. The taste doesn't change. I've cured it up for 60 days before. It doesn't change at all. It's weird.
And I wouldn't even know. I've kind of just done this 30-day thing for like the last year and a bit, just because I've gotten to a point where I'm very fortunate that the supply is well stocked, and I can let something sit for 30 days and forget it's there, you know. But
I saw you nodding a lot about the 30 days, Chris, too. So you're obviously a lengthier cure as well.
Yeah, minimum 2 weeks, and at that point, I still taste the chlorophyll, right? So, as long as I have a stash on hand, 30 days at the minimum. If it's longer than that, that's great, because I think you briefly touched on it. Some cultivars, you know, and this is according to Leafly, it can take up to 6 months, sometimes even longer than that, to get those for a full cure, to get to the true taste and smell of that cultivar. So it can be a lengthy cure, and 30 days at the minimum, really, for me.
And I think what needs to be pointed out is, like, I'm not curing. My shit ain't stored properly. You know, I do store in a cool, moist environment. Well, not moist, but a cool. But you know, it's relatively 50. Well, it's 60 degrees in, give or take, in the jar, but it's in my basement in the dark. But I don't can my jars. I just use those typical canning jars with twisty lids.
Mason jars. Sealed mason jars. Yep.
But they're twisted shut. They're not canned shut. And I think that would give I've never used, but there's an argument to be said about using those vaults, those
C vault.
Yeah, C vault.
Yep, they use those as well.
Right. So you want to have that good sealed cure, or you're not making it 6 months in those jars. You're not making it.
Yeah,
six
they're
Really? You think
overdry.
so? I think those mason jars are solid. As long as you're twisting them tight enough, they're
If you don't
really
open it at
solid. I
all-
haven't had any issues in regular mason jars like that.
I maybe it's my laziness in tightening them. Yes, but I just
You need to start working out.
Hit him with the limper.
Like I've got buds in the jars right now. Like it's not unusual for me to have something that's over a year in my collection, and a lot of those over a year's, yeah, they're not dried out like crust, but they're certainly not at an optimal.
I get what you mean,
moisture
but do you
content.
use the humidity packs? Do you use those?
No.
Okay, I use the humidity packs. The
for long-term
Velveeta makes
storage.
one.
Yeah,
If I was going
Integra.
long term, yeah, that would be, yeah, I definitely should.
Because those are like there's a 62% one, which which is said to be ideal.
Right.
You pop one of those in there, and it stabilizes it at
I-
62, and you can keep that for. I've had stuff for years. It's
I've never
fantastic.
considered using like a Bavita. Is that what it is? Like a Bavita?
yeah.
I've never considered. I only ever used them very early on in my career, but used them too early. A lot of people think they're good for, you pull
To
your
cure
shit,
with
you
them.
put it into a jar, and you throw a pack in there. What are you throwing a pack in there for? No, you need to maintain that that moisture for a good few weeks before or at least a couple weeks before you're throwing a Bavita pack in there. But that I used them wrong. I used them the exact opposite way I just described. I was putting them in there, chop off my stuff, because when you chop it and everything feels moist or dry, it's like, oh no, and then you put it in the jar, and you don't even put a Bavita pack in there, but all of a sudden everything's all stuck together because it's so moist still, and it's like see, and what I was doing is I was chopping them, thinking, oh, okay, these are ready to go in the jar. Throw in a Bavita pack, throw it in the jar, and I was molding weed left, right, and center because I wasn't getting there fast enough to get the. It would not left. I'm exaggerating slightly.
Even once or twice.
My ignorance
sucks.
wasn't that bad. It does. It certainly does. But I've molded more weed using humidity packs, and this is not a shot at Bavita. This is a shot at
Human error.
my ignorance. Yeah. And I see in Bavita's comment sections people giving them shit because they can't use a Bavita pack or a moisture pack, a humidity pack properly. It's not Bavita's fault. Bavita makes a great product.
It's us.
It's
the people.
It's a humidity pack. It's not much. It's a humidity pack that you find them in stereo equipment. You find them in the new tools that you buy. Like, it's a humidity pack. It's not rocket science. You just need to know how to use it.
Yeah, I'll use them a little bit differently than the way you just explained. So, like I mentioned, I takes about 7-8 days, sometimes 10 days to dry, and then from there I'll do the dry trim, and then I'll put them immediately into jars, right? But also in the jars, I'll use the glass mason jars, like you mentioned. I also have C-Vault containers. Those things are freaking awesome. I love them because they're so huge, right? You can just do one burp when you're burping. It's just one thing instead of opening up a million different jars. But I'll put them immediately into jars with little hygrometers, those little digital hygrometers, so I can see what the humidity is inside the jar. And then, if it's over 65%, creeping higher than that, then I'll remove the top. Sometimes I'll empty out the buds and lay them out and let them dry longer. But the goal is to get it to stabilize around 62%. And then from there, once it's stable, well, then I don't burp as often, right? I don't need to burp as often. It's stable at that amount. And sometimes that takes a couple days. Sometimes that takes a couple weeks in order to slowly kind of bring it down to where it needs to be. Well, not in a couple weeks, actually, probably like less than a week. But I don't really pop in those humidity packs until like it drops lower than the 62. Maybe it's at like 60 or whatever, and I'll pop in the humidity packs in order to rehydrate it. Or I think there was times where it was like maybe like 64% I've popped in those humidity packs, but I would rather use the humidity packs to bring the humidity up versus kind of bring it down. And those work either way. It works either way. So that's the way I use them.
Yeah,
and we are talking only just a couple percentage points. If you're sitting at 80% and you're throwing it in there thinking she's bringing it down to 62, you've got another thing coming. We're talking, what, I don't even know, they might advertise it less than 5%. What will it correct if you've got like a 60 or
sounds
50,
about right?
Yeah,
58,
pretty minor.
it'll do a 62. But if you're at 40, 35%, hoping she brings it to 62. You're going to be
No way.
outside that.
No way.
And then maybe we should save, I just thought we should do myths and shit. Because you ever heard about putting the orange peel in with your weed?
Yeah.
What a horrible myth that is. I've never thought of a faster way to mold your weed.
Or make that chlorophyll come back.
Right, or making it come back.
Yeah, not good at that. Well, some people, myth kind of in here, but of a curing or drying process, some people will put their stuff into a turkey bag. That seems to be really popular, no matter how much they're pulling. That seems to be the thing. I don't understand it. I don't get it. I don't feel like that's the secure way to do it.
Like a turkey bag. Is it like a paper bag?
No, like turkey, like for cooking a turkey in the oven, seemingly.
It's like plastic bag, right? Yeah, commercial facilities use. I know a couple of guys who own commercial facilities that use turkey bags.
Yeah, it seems interesting to me about storage. Like, probably better than maybe a plastic tote in a sense. But, I try to go glass as much as possible. That's my goal. When I have had larger pulls, like an outdoor run, I'm like, fuck it. Let's put it in something else. You just need to put it somewhere. I don't really care about it. But I do notice that it does degrade when you put it into something like that in comparison. I had a buddy who was doing that for years, and I was like, why are you doing it, bro? You're pulling like 3 plants. Acting crazy now. You don't need to put it all in that. Put in some jars. Go get a couple big jars. They got these big giant jars, like huge ones, man. It makes no sense. But every time he did it, his stuff would dry a little too quickly, and it never turned out exactly like he assumed it would. And he's like, how are you getting these terps? How are you getting this? I'm like, dude, it's not that complicated what I'm doing. It's pretty straightforward. So maybe you should consider watching Cannabis Lifestyle TV. Maybe you'll learn how I do it, And we all got videos on our channels,
A lot of people do complain about taste. Pigeons, I've got this hay taste. It tastes like grass, cut grass. What did I do? Chances are, most of the time, it's in those last couple weeks while you're trying to dry. It dried too fast. It lost its flavonoids, terpenoids, terpenes. I'm
Both
sorry,
of them. All
cannabinoids. It lost all of it. It lost it all. And you're smoking hay. You're smoking grass. You're just smoking dried.
See, that's the problem, man. A lot of people, and they'll pull their plant early too. That's another one. They'll be like, man, I don't know what to do.
I did that for years.
Yeah,
I did that for years.
Go longer.
Like almost the first 2 years of my YouTube, or a year or so, year and a half. It's like I harvested way too early on all of my plants. I was under a misconception that I always understood flushing. I was under the misconception that I always understood flushing. That's the whole sentence. And when they said that you need to start flushing at the last 2 weeks of harvest, I was like, okay, the breeder says 64 days. I need to start harvesting or flushing 2 weeks before that? Okay.
Yeah.
So at day 40, fucking, I'm flushing. I was losing out. And it's like a lot of the plants tried to keep up with me doing this craziness. And some of them did finish quite well, but the majority of them were under just powered because they were harvested way too early. And so, yeah, there was a misconception. So then I tried to go on this. I tried to make lots of flushing videos to try to correct what I had done and and correct and try to get the right information out there, because it's not that I was wrong. You apply all that same information, it's right. You do flush in the last 2 weeks of harvest, but it's after the 64 days. It's when she's done, then I start harvesting, which is kind of an oxymoron. But
and see, some people argue to not flush at all. And for me, we probably should have touched on this when we were talking about that. I do more of a leaching system, and it's where I just stop feeding my plant any nutrients for the next 2 weeks once it does seem done, because I like to see that fade. I like to really, not all my cultivars do that, but some really get that beautiful fade to the hues that I'm like, this is what I'm looking for, man. The leaves got that purplish funk to them, just really nice. That's usually when I'm ready to pull. But I just the blunt I was just smoking, if you guys noticed, it was a completely white ash. I didn't flush that at all, just to see. And because I got its sister next to it that I'm flushing, and I'm going to see how that goes. If there's any difference, if I notice anything. I noticed that this one finished up very vibrant green, and this one's already starting to fade a little bit more. So that's the only thing I'm seeing.
What was the medium? Was that an organic?
Go. So an organic side, you wouldn't even need to flush. You would just.
Well, that's what that's what I've heard is organic doesn't need to flush.
Yeah, but that's where even still, there's been some studies that have come out, again, potentially biased research from nutrient companies saying you don't need to flush, but
a lot of it is.
I'm seeing it now. Like, I think a lot of it is how your plant's drying, and the not so much the residual nutrient buildup that could give you that the burn or the harshness, things like that, unless like you're really pushing it. But and maybe a foliar spray if you're doing that in flower, I wouldn't recommend that ever. But now hindsight, I'm like,
Despite
was
what
it a
Annie
different
Quinn
variable?
says.
I don't know.
There's a lot of controversy or debate on the flushing process, and I'm sure we'll get dislikes for just being one way or the other. But Rob, like you had said, you like to see that fade in the leaves, the chlorophyll breakdown. I completely agree with you. That's the same way I am. There has been a study last year by RX Green Technologies. I actually did a video on this talking about that study, but they're a nutrient company, so it could be biased. However, they say that there was no difference in THC, terpenes, yield. I think there was another thing, but nutrient content in the plant. There was no difference versus flushing for 2 weeks. I think they did 10 days, 7 days, and then no flush at all. And they didn't see any difference. So they had said you could feed all the way up until the end. Or you can take it as in, well, the plant doesn't need nutrients. It doesn't need any additional nutrients for the past 2 weeks. So you can cut it off at that 2 weeks, right? Because it's not going to make a difference. So why bother continue to feed? But me personally, and this is one thing I had said in the video, is that fade, that chlorophyll breakdown is something I like to see, because although it happens in the curing process, drying process, curing process will be a chlorophyll breakdown as well. It seems like it's a jump start, right? If it's the chlorophyll process is already happening while the plant is still growing, well, then there's less that needs to be done during the drying and curing process. So arguably, it's a little bit faster of a cure in that case. And that was my argument behind it all. And for those of you who have read my book, there is a flushing section in my book. For those that don't know, I have a book for beginners indoor growing. It's called 7 Steps to Grow Cannabis. You can get it on Amazon. What?
Oh, you got $2?
No, just one.
No,
did I say 2?
Didn't you? Did you release one, an updated version or something?
It's a 3rd edition. So last year I did the 3rd edition of this book. It's called 7 Steps to Grow Cannabis. But there is a section on flushing, and I wrote that before this study came out. So I actually want to revise this section even more. But it does mention flushing before harvest. And there's a lot of general guidance, right? So a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll check the ppm of the runoff to try to reduce the amount of nutrients, and therefore they should see a fade in their plant, right? So general guidance on there was like, okay, around 100 ppm, at that point, you should be seeing that fade within the plant. And that's something I mentioned. And that's something I'll definitely update, because like you had mentioned, there are these studies coming out that say it's not necessary. Some people say it's not necessary to flush. It doesn't make a difference. So I need to be more transparent, in the book.
Just thorough
and
with
that's
it. Yeah.
a revision that will come in. But yeah, my stance is just seeing that fade. Now, whether that be a flush, and you talked about leaching versus flushing, that's something there. People consider flushing as in running a large amount of water through the medium. Some people consider flushing just cutting off nutrients for the last 2 weeks. And cutting off nutrients for the last 2 weeks, some consider that leaching. So there's a lot of terminology that's misinterpreted. People say it in different ways. But leaching, cutting off nutrients for the past couple weeks, I'll do that if I'm not seeing that fade in the plant, because I do like that fade, and that helps bring out some of the colors, and lowering the temperature helps bring out some of the colors and some phenotypes as well. So, but yeah, flushing, highly debatable. Absolutely.
Yeah, that might be a whole dedicated video. We'll see. If you guys really think in the comment section, drop it below. I know some gromies have asked me over in our Discord, been like, hey, what do you think about this, this, and this? I'm like, you've heard my opinion. So maybe have
it
the
always
three
starts a
amigos drop
discussion.
it. We'll see. We'll see.
Always starts a discussion.
But I think that was a great discussion, guys. Overall, we've got some, like I said, overlapping things. A lot of stuff is like tried and true. No matter how you grow, you're going to go about it this way. But it's cool to see with the different environments, different areas, different processes, how we go about it to get the end result that you could put bud by bud by bud, and someone probably wouldn't know all the efforts and all the steps that went into making it that. So it's cool, man. I dig it myself. It's a learning experience too. So.
And I totally dig the fact that each of us do a little bit differently when it comes to the steps. I can appreciate each of your talents and your guys' skill, and I have found a path that works for me. And I think that's important for anyone who's watching this. You can look at Rob, you can look at Chris, you can look at Pigeons, and you could say, I don't do it any way like this guy does, and I'm seeing amazing results. keep doing it your way. Don't change, or don't think that you have to do something differently because it's not what we're doing, or it's not what someone else in the comment section is telling you, because everyone grows differently, and that's what's important to take into consideration here. And the harvest is no different. The harvest is a very sacred, very personal time. We kind of forgot, like, I don't know about you guys, but when I start, the harvest starts when the T-Swizzy, the Taylor Swift, goes on high, the beers come out, the buddies come over, and it's like, let's go, baby, let's go. Now COVID has kind of changed that. It's still just as personal, it's still just as sacred. It's just now it's you're doing it with your loved one or by yourself.
T-Swizz is a little
but
quieter,
you got to have a great time. Yeah, T-Swizz is a little bit lower, but you got that Miley Cyrus just on crank, right? But the reality is that have fun with it. Have fun with it. It can be a long, tedious, what do we say? It's trim jail, and it's only jail if you make it jail. Enjoy it. I personally will sometimes harvest over a few days. We got 3, 5, 6, 7, 10 plants. It's like, don't harvest them all in one run. Take your time. Do a couple. Some people ask, Pigeons, have you ever harvested a plant a little bit at a time? Absolutely. Sometimes I notice the top looks really good, but the bottom isn't there yet. So yeah, I'll take the top, take it, and away I go. Or I don't have time, so I do half a plant one day and throw it back into the flower room so it enjoys the rest of the night. Take your time, have fun. Everyone does it their own way, and there's no reason to make it jail.
Some people call it trim jail. I call it trim party. Right, try to make the best of it.
Yeah, right. Glass
because it's
full.
up to you to make it fun, right? So you could either go into it and dread it and be like, oh crap, I got to trim for the next 2 or 3 hours. It's like, God damn, well, sitting there bored, whatever, right? Or you can make it into something fun, right? Maybe you're smoking before, maybe you're taking shots before. I've live streamed and tried to make it fun, doing trimming.
Yeah, I've been your live stream.
It's really up to you to kind of try to make it fun, try to make it
Just
fun.
watch your fingers.
But everybody does it differently, and do what works for you. Shamelessly steal best practices from others. Don't be afraid to share those best practices. That's one of the reason why we have this podcast, is to talk about what works well for us. And then others can potentially get ideas and try out new things, and just trying new things and having fun with it, and trying to continuously improve. I think is key total for growing in general. So.
Well said.
Amen. I think with that being said, man, it covers everything pretty in detail. If there's anything we may have missed, if you're over on YouTube or watch CLtv.com, drop it in the comment section. Let us know. If you got any extra tips, or your process may differ a little bit, let us know. It's always interesting to hear. We got some awesome viewers. If you're just watching and you're not a subscriber, smash the subscribe button. Bell next to be notified every time we're dropping content. We might go live on YouTube once in a while. Otherwise, Thursdays will be over on twitch.tv/From the Stash Podcast, which will be going there in minutes here, actually. So.
Minutes. Thanks for the convo, boys. Had a great day today, man.
It's Rob from CLtv, Chris, aka Mr. Grow It, Pigeons 420. We'll see y'all next week.
Peace.